Good evening, everyone. This is Dr. Ryan Truchelut of WeatherTiger, and tonight I'll be discussing the very latest on Hurricane Idalia as it approaches the North Florida coastline overnight and into early tomorrow morning. I'm going to allow a couple minutes for the audience to filter in, and then I'm going to dig in on all the impacts that we can expect here in the Eastern Panhandle, North Central Florida, West Central Florida over the next 12 to 24 hours. So stick around. I'll be back in about 2 minutes, and we'll get right into it. All right, folks. Well, I'm going to get into it. I'm Dr. Ryan Truchelut of WeatherTiger, and this is Hurricane Idalia, Category 2 hurricane, a strengthening Category 2 hurricane, likely to become a major hurricane overnight, and likely to make landfall tomorrow morning in the Big Bend. First time in history that a Category 3 hurricane or above will have made landfall in the Big Bend region in Appalachia Bay. So, history in the making tonight. So let's discuss all the key aspects of the forecast and how to stay safe. I'm going to start by discussing those key messages that the National Hurricane Center issues with every advisory package they put out, what they want the public to take away from their forecasts. And the first key message, the key point, is that there is catastrophic storm surge impacts likely, 10 to 15 feet of storm surge above normal high tide levels, expected somewhere in eastern Appalachia Bay into the northern Nature Coast. So that's life-threatening storm surge. That's not storm surge that has ever been seen in living history in those areas. So if you think you have a frame of context for this kind of storm surge, you really don't. So storm surge warnings in effect, evacuations in effect. If you're in a low-lying area, you can hide from the wind, but you have to run from the water. That's the number one key message from the Hurricane Center tonight, is that potential and in fact really certainty of life-threatening storm surge. So key message number two from the Hurricane Center is that there's obviously also associated with a major hurricane, you're going to have a core of very destructive winds that are going to move onshore somewhere in the Big Bend region through the morning hours tomorrow. Hurricane warning area extends all across Appalachia Bay down to the Tampa Bay region, and there's going to be a core of destructive winds landing somewhere here in the Eastern Panhandle or northern portion of the Nature Coast. We'll discuss that later. And then key message number three is there's an increasing potential for some flash flooding, urban flooding, in association with Idalia's landfall, and we'll discuss that as well. So the other thing I want to show before we get started on talking about those impacts is this is the latest forecast track from the National Hurricane Center as of their 8 p.m. intermediate advisory. Here's where they had the center of circulation at 8 p.m. And that's about, I would say, about 130 miles due west of Port Charlotte, moving north at about 15, 16 miles per hour. This is the 2 a.m. forecast point, where Idalia is likely to strengthen to a Category 3 hurricane. By 2 a.m., so it's coming up, coming up here soon, we'll probably be looking at a major hurricane. And then into the overnight hours and towards the morning, we'll start to bend that direction of motion even further north-northeast, with landfall expected somewhere here, likely in Taylor County, here in the Big Bend, sometime in the 7 o'clock to 10 o'clock time frame is what I would say at this point. So there's that cone of uncertainty outlined in blue. That's the potential area where it's most likely that the center of circulation could track. This area outlined in red, those are your hurricane warnings. So, I do want to point out that you can see this radar overlay. Here's the center of circulation. There's that eye wall. So you can see that Idalia is following that hurricane center forecast track quite closely, maybe even ticking just a little bit to the east of it as we go through the evening hours tonight. This is another look at radar, and what I've plotted here are the maximum wind gusts that we've seen so far over Florida today. So here's the center of the hurricane, and we've seen wind gusts into low-end tropical storm force across much of the state, even across southeast Florida as these bands of showers have come through. And we'll continue to see that expand north here through the overnight hours tonight. Nothing too bad in terms of damaging wind so far, but we've seen some tropical storm force gusts. This is the National Hurricane Center's intensity forecast for Idalia, and as of 8 o'clock, we actually are up here with sustained winds of 105 miles per hour, 90 knots. That's a Category 2 hurricane. Hurricane Center continues to forecast that this will peak out just prior to landfall as a Category 3 hurricane. They have last advisory package, the peak was 125 miles per hour sustained winds. Category 4 starts at 130 miles per hour, so that's certainly a possibility. The storm has about 10 to 12 more hours to strengthen further, and it may well continue to do so all the way towards landfall. And the reason for that is, I've been talking about this for a long time, really since Friday. My concerns centered on Tuesday, because that's the time that this system was likely to be moving in a very favorable environment for intensification, not only over extremely warm waters of the eastern Gulf of Mexico, but in a very favorable upper level wind environment. So this is a water vapor imagery loop of basically tracing what the winds and water vapor content of the air is doing up about 5 miles up in the atmosphere. And you can see, here's the hurricane, and you can see all this outflow. Once the air goes through the storm, it expands out and away from that center of circulation. And it's not only expanding to the north here, but it's also, you're seeing this airflow also going away down to the south as well. That's called dual channel outflow. If you've been watching these videos, I've been talking about that for a few days now, and this is why you worry about that, because it really contributes to intensification. So I don't think we're going to get much help from the upper level wind environment over the next 10 to 12 hours. It'll continue to favor strengthening. Maybe we're going to get a little bit of help at the lower levels. So this is water vapor a little lower down in the atmosphere, maybe more like 2 or 3 miles above. You can see there's plenty of moisture associated with the core of the hurricane right now, but you do see these kind of oranges and yellows lurking out here to the west. As the storm moves in towards land, it could start to wrap some of this drier air into the southern part of the storm. And maybe just at the end cause intensity to plateau. I hope. That's not a sure thing. It may well continue to intensify all the way up to landfall. Category 3 at landfall, it's very likely. Category 4 at landfall, it's possible. So I know if you've been following the forecast today, there's been a lot of concern about the potential for a shift further west. The Hurricane Center track between last night and today did shift about 20-25 miles to the west. We're talking about landfall closer to Cedar Key 36 hours ago. The track shifted over towards Steinhatchee in Taylor County, and now as of the 5 o'clock advisory has shifted a bit further west into central Taylor County south of Perry. So the concern, of course, is that this trend would continue, and there's been some modeling support for if you not so much there's plenty of modeling support for the Hurricane Center forecast track of a track towards Taylor County, but there's also been some modeling support for a track towards the western half of Appalachia Bay. And I just wanted to address that here. So this is an infrared satellite image overlaid with the 12Z GFS model ensemble track. So they run a lot of different versions of the GFS model, and with some very slight changes at the beginning of the model run, and see where it goes. And these GFS model runs and some of the GFS kind of derived hurricane models have been the ones that have been further west. And one thing I like to do, I always like to compare models with reality, because sometimes the models and reality simply don't match up. And this is one of those cases. You can see here on the infrared satellite imagery the center of circulation right in here, and that's to the east, or at least on the eastern edge of those GFS ensemble tracks. On the right side of the image, that's the Euro ensemble tracks, and you can see the eye wall is really much more within this kind of pocket of the guidance from the Euro ensembles that bend more towards central or eastern Appalachia Bay, more in line with the Hurricane Center forecast. And again, I've been watching this all day. There are some forecast keys to, are we looking for that continuation of that westward track? One of the keys was, does it move to the west of 85 degrees west longitude? As some of the models, like the GFS were showing earlier today, Idalia didn't do that. Some of those models were looking for a little bit of a westward jog this afternoon. That didn't happen either. And you can look at the recon aircraft that are flying around through the storm right now, and you can see each of these center fixes where the Hurricane Hunter actually flies through the eye of the storm and finds out exactly where that center is located. They're all coming in a bit east of, the motion is predominantly to the north, but it's just a bit east of due north now, at about a forward heading of about 10 degrees north over the last 3 or 4 hours. So that's something that the Hurricane Center forecast track showed. You can see that bend east in the Hurricane Center forecast track is a key part of that forecast of a track towards Taylor County. And we do see that in the observations tonight. Wobbles back and forth could certainly happen, but on the whole, we are starting to see that little bit of a tendency for Idalia to move east of due north. And that's important, because from where Idalia is right now, and I'll zoom out here so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. So Tallahassee, here we are up here, and we've got Steinhatchee is over here. So what it would take is a heading of about 5 degrees to head up towards Tallahassee directly, but a heading of more like 20 degrees on average to go over in the direction of Steinhatchee. So the fact that we're already seeing a track average heading of about 10 degrees, tendency to probably bend further east with time, that's a good sign that the NHC forecast track is on course, and we're not likely, at least, to see a big correction back to the west. And of course, we really, really, really care about that in Tallahassee, because that really does make the difference between bad impacts and really, I would say, truly damaging impacts, long-lasting, worse structural damage and that kind of thing. Just as one example of kind of that correction that we've seen in some of the modeling data, this is one of the American, probably I would say the flagship, the hurricane-specific model run by the National Weather Service. This is the 18Z run from this afternoon. It's calling for a landfall in Taylor County now, but if you roll back to the previous model cycle, it was much further west, and the previous model cycle before that, even further west, and suggesting a track into western Appalachia Bay. So we've seen that correction with time. Still, of course, likely to be a major hurricane landfall. It's an agreement on all the modeling, but we're seeing some heading back in the direction of the Hurricane Center forecast. And the reason, of course, that matters in terms of impacts, let's talk about surge and why that matters with surge. So with with storm surge, it's the region that's along close to the center of circulation and east of there that gets damaging surge. That's, of course, the regions where the winds are onshore, piling that water up onto land, pushing it ashore. On the left side of the track, but you have the opposite of that. You have offshore winds, and that's actually blowing water away from the land, resulting in much lower surge values, or even in some cases no surge or negative surge. So where exactly this tracks makes a big difference, because if Idalia was actually to track by somehow over here into western Appalachia Bay, then you're talking about central Appalachia Bay and eastern Appalachia Bay getting that storm surge and covering a much broader area of Appalachia Bay. But if you are having this track over towards Taylor County, you'll still get some surge here in central Appalachia Bay with these winds kind of parallel to coast, but the predominant eastern Appalachia Bay and the northern nature coast, that's where the focus of that surge potential is going to be. So this is the National Hurricane Center's peak storm surge forecast, and you can see they are indeed saying that it's eastern Appalachia Bay, this region outlined in purple here between Osceola River and Yankeetown. Somewhere in there is going to get 10 to 15 feet of storm surge. We don't know exactly who, we don't know exactly how much, but it's going to be an amount of surge that we don't have a good historical context for. The high water mark of the past 20 years is Dennis in 2005. Cedar Key got about 8 feet of storm surge in Dennis in 2005, and that was true for a lot of eastern Appalachia Bay as well. Kind of 6 to 8 feet was a general rule. Well, this is going to be higher than that at peak, especially in those areas that are east of the center of circulation. Further south along the nature coast, we're going to see quite high surge as well, 5 feet or higher north of Tampa Bay. The track may have drifted a little further offshore, but that surge is still baked in because there's a really large area of tropical storm force winds that are going to be blowing onshore along Fetch off the Gulf. That's going to be pushing that surge ashore. And even further south here into southwest Florida, we have seen several feet of storm surge in southwest Florida as Idalia went by today. This is a model of if exactly what's predicted in the 5 p.m. Hurricane Center forecast track was to come to pass with landfall just west of Steinhatchee. You can see here it's these regions of red and purple extending from basically Crystal River region up towards western Taylor County. That's your area where you're going to be seeing 8 to 10 feet of surge or greater. And then there's this region further south along the southern nature coast into Tampa Bay where it's seeing anywhere from 4 to 7 or 8 feet of surge as well with those onshore winds. If the track was to move further west, well, then you would extend that region of that 10-foot plus surge further west, and you'd probably diminish this surge a little bit in here, but not all that much, simply because that fetch is so large. As is, if the track goes into Taylor County, you will see some surge across central Appalachia Bay, but it won't be as high as eastern Appalachia Bay. One other thing I want to mention with surge regarding the timing of landfall. The best possible timing for landfall would probably be realistic timing for landfall anyway, would probably be right around 8 in the morning, because that's when this relative low tide is. Not the lowest tide of the day, but it is a low tide at around 8 o'clock, a little bit later the further west you go in Appalachia Bay. It's a very high tide right now because of the full moon, and if we were to delay landfall into the early afternoon hours, you'd be looking at another 3 feet of water in parts of Appalachia Bay just due to the tides alone. So if we can bring this storm in around 8, that would be as good as we could ask for in this situation. And it does look like that's a realistic timing of landfall. I want to move on to talking about the winds, because I know that is on your mind if you're watching from Tallahassee. It's on my mind. I'm in southeast Tallahassee, and I've been agonizing about every inch west or east that Idalia has been moving today. And the reason for that is as a major hurricane moves ashore, it generally has a core of its core is generally about 20 to 30 miles in radius. So that would be, just drawing that, it would roughly look like this, and that's the region where you get those sustained hurricane force winds. You get, there's an inner core, even smaller region where you get major hurricane force winds, and you could see wind gusts in this kind of donut that's 50 miles in diameter anywhere from 80 to 120 miles per hour or greater. So what I'm showing here is this is a wind threat forecast from the National Weather Service. This region outlined in purple, that's the region that has the greatest chance of seeing wind gusts exceeding 110 miles per hour, so major hurricane force. Not everywhere in this area in purple is going to see wind gusts exceeding 100 miles per hour, far from it. Because you can think about if that track heads towards the southern end of Taylor County, there's that donut, and it's staying well southeast of Tallahassee. If the landfall is more in the Steinhatchee region of eastern Taylor County, but if it's making landfall in western Taylor County, then potentially you start to get that core of those more destructive, stronger hurricane force wind gusts clipping Tallahassee. So that's why those little jukes back and forth in the track today are really important for Tallahassee. So outside of that core, you still get plenty of stronger winds, but they're likely tropical storm force. So I think what we've narrowed down at this point, realistically, I do think that we're likely talking about landfall in Taylor County. If it does trend a little more towards the western end of Taylor County, that still puts Tallahassee in the potential region of getting that kind of northwestern part of the outer core, especially if the track was to trend further west and we're talking about landfall more in the St. Mark's region, as with Hermine. We know Tallahassee got the northwestern quad of Hermine's core. So, realistically, I do think that the National Hurricane Center forecast track is a good guidance here. I don't see any reason, as of right now, core. So this is coming up here. This would be 6 o'clock in the morning. And at 6 a.m., per the European model, which is tracking pretty closely here with the NHC forecast track, there's that brown region. There's your region of those major hurricane force sustained winds, and your major hurricane force winds kind of in this little eye wall right in here on the north and the eastern eye wall. So going forward, with time, we're bringing that into Taylor County, kind of south of Perry, west of Steinhatchee, and on that track, that donut of the strongest core of winds goes just to Tallahassee. This is Tallahassee here. Goes just to Tallahassee's east and rolls through Madison, Live Oak, up towards Valdosta, Monticello right on the edge of this. Those are the areas right now where, Perry, Madison, Live Oak, you're really in line for that core as the system moves inland at 15 to 20 miles per hour. It won't likely be weakening at landfall. It'll be moving quickly at landfall, and that's a recipe for bringing strong winds well inland into the Eastern Panhandle. So again, as I've been saying, someone in the Eastern Panhandle, someone in the Big Bend is gonna lose out here. Right now, it looks like that is likely to be Taylor County, Lafayette County, Western Dixie County, up into Madison. You're under the gun for sure. Tallahassee, you are not out of the woods. A very slight shift in the track would bring you back into that potential for 80 plus mile per hour winds or more, which would be beyond, I think, the kind of winds that we saw in Tallahassee with Michael or with Hermine. If the core stays just to our south and east, we're probably looking more at 50s and 60s mile an hour for our top gusts in Tallahassee. But we're on the knife edge. We'll see how the night goes, and I'll be watching it very carefully as we head into the early morning hours. Just again, this is the HAFS model, which I showed earlier, kind of for the precipitation component of it. This is with the winds, and it's those purples. There's that core. HAFS is bringing that ashore, kind of in central, west central Taylor County, and then moving that core north and inland. And you're still getting those hurricane force wind gusts even into south central Georgia and straight past the Florida-Georgia line. So in Florida, you're going to rain. I want to talk about two aspects of it. First is timing. Here's what's currently going on with Idalia's rainfall. We're seeing this big band pushing into west central Florida right now. That's your primary rain band. This is likely as bad as it's going to get for you here in southwest Florida, west central Florida. You'll be getting into that shortly if you're not in it already. Tampa Bay's just getting into it now. as Idalia is continuing to track just a hair east of due north, we're getting this there's a band up here in northern Florida that's going to push through over the next couple hours. You'll get a break, and then there's this rain shield of the heavier, steadier rainfall that is going to be moving into North Florida. Well, probably sometime in the 1 or 2 o'clock hour would be my guess. And that'll, once you get that rain, it'll probably continue raining heavily or less heavily until the late morning. Interestingly, you are kind of seeing this enhancement. You're seeing these rains expand here in that northwest quad. Sometimes you do get, in these landfalling hurricanes that are interacting with a jet, you do get some increase in rainfall, and you get really heavy rainfall rates northwest of the center of circulation. Not necessarily even associated with the core and the worst of the winds, but very heavy rainfall. So timing-wise, I think that lays it out, talking about early morning hours for the heavy, steady rainfall across the Big Bend, eastern panhandle. The worst of it coming through coastal regions, probably sometime between 7 and 10 a.m. The worst of it coming through Tallahassee, Madison, Live Oak. I would say probably between 8 and 11 would be my guess. And then everybody clearing out here as we head into the late afternoon and evening hours. So this is the total rainfall that we can expect. We have seen a bit of a shift here in the guidance over the past 6 hours or so. We've seen an enhancement of these rainfall totals west of the center of circulation, about 30 to 60 miles west, including Tallahassee. So Tallahassee and now a band of central Georgia up into South Carolina, looking for 5 to 10 inches of rainfall from the system overall, likely coming in mostly in those morning hours with a few hours of 2 or 2 inch an hour rainfall rates. So that's some pretty heavy rainfall, and that can lead to the potential for some flash flooding. And this region outlined in red, including Tallahassee, is a region that is at some elevated risk of flash flooding if we get those 5 to 10 inches of rainfall falling in a very short time frame. So that's something to watch out for near streams and rivers and low-lying areas, even inland, that aren't subject to storm surge flooding. So that's something to watch for as well. Final risk, tornadoes. There is a tornado watch now in effect just south of Tallahassee and then all along the west central Florida coastline. I don't believe I've yet seen any tornado warnings. I'm going to check just to make sure. No, I don't see any live tornado warnings, so that is something. And just checking, there's an update from the Hurricane Center, so just looking at what that is. Okay, maximum sustained winds with Idalia up to 110 miles per hour, pressure down to 960 millibars. So reconnaissance continuing to find an intensifying hurricane tonight. 110 miles per hour is just on the cusp of Category 3 intensity. So that is a Category 3 hurricane in the making, and I'm sure we'll have one imminently as strengthening continues. So I am going to check for some questions now, and I see if I have any questions I can address. Okay, for Liberty County, again, I do think you're far enough west that you're not going to get the core of Idalia. It's very unlikely that you would get the core of the storm at this point. So I don't think you're going to get hurricane force winds. I think you'll probably get some tropical storm force wind gusts in the 40 to 55 mile per hour range, and some very heavy rainfall. If you go back and you look at that rainfall graphic, that does include areas west of Tallahassee as well, in that region of at least 4 to 8 inches of rainfall. So that's something to watch west of Tallahassee. But you keep going west, and there's not much rainfall in the western half of the Panhandle. Question about strengthening before reaching Tallahassee. Idalia is likely to continue intensifying for the next 6 to 8 hours, and it's really only about 10 hours out from the coast now. So we'll be reaching Category 3 intensity shortly. Category 4 intensity is on the table, but it does appear that I think more likely than not, and I'm not ruling out that Tallahassee does see a portion of the northwest portion of the core. It certainly is possible, and that's the scenario that would bring Tallahassee the 80 or 75 to 100 mile per hour gusts or higher. I'm not ruling that out, but along the Hurricane Center forecast track into Steinhatchee, and I'll go back and just draw that donut on the National Weather Service's hurricane threats and impacts map. If you have a landfall point, this is where the Hurricane Center is predicting that landfall to occur. This is roughly a circle of 50 miles in diameter, and it's moving like this inland. And there is, this region I've highlighted in green. That's your region where you'd probably be seeing those hurricane force wind gusts, and it would just miss Tallahassee to the east. So I don't think Tallahassee should evacuate. I think that unless you're in a very, if you're in a low-lying structure, if you're in a place that is flood-prone, yes, you should. If you're under an evacuation order, of course you should. If you're in a well-built structure, I don't think, probably not unless you have a particular reason to, but everybody's risk tolerances and situation in life is a little bit different, so I don't tell people what to do or not do in that situation. As far as Panacea, yes, Panacea is also something that if the track was to deviate here on the left edge of that a cone of uncertainty of where the center of circulation could travel and head out in the Alligator Point direction, then things would be quite bad in Panacea, and you would get surge and potentially major hurricane force wind gusts. If it tracks further, if it tracks further east into central or eastern Taylor County, and that's the landfall point, you'll be maybe seeing hurricane force wind gusts, low end or high end tropical storm force gusts. Winds in Oviedo, my home county of Seminole, not much in east central Florida, some intermittent gusts to low end tropical storm force. Monticello, highest sustained max gusts. Monticello too. I think going 20 miles east of Tallahassee really ups your risk of getting those hurricane force wind gusts. If I had to guess, I'd probably say 80 or 90, but it could go higher than that. So that's obviously very bad for trees and power, and I'm sure we'll be seeing plenty of trees down and power out in Tallahassee as well with tropical storm force winds, if that is what comes to pass. All right, I think that is going to be it for tonight. I will be back tomorrow morning, bright and early, or dim and early, or actually pitch black and early, starting up a live blog in the 5 or 6 o'clock hour as Idalia approaches shore, and I'll be continuing coverage all the way through the late morning at least until the dangerous winds are out of Florida for all of us, and that's all there is to say. Good luck, everyone. I'm Dr. Ryan Truchelut of WeatherTiger, and I'll be back tomorrow with coverage until this thing is over. Until then, keep watching the skies.